I have some contraband. Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. Earlier this year, the Reintegrative Therapy Association was banned from YouTube. That meant that the documentary they made, Free to Love, was lost to YouTube. And it's a documentary that just simply shows the stories of 4 different men who underwent reintegrative therapy to better understand and explore change in their same-sex attractions. Now, the full documentary is available on Odysee, but I know a lot of people just use YouTube, and so I just see it as a tragedy that it's not available for everyone to view there. So, I figured let's just take the chance and let's do a commentary on the documentary that's on Odysee. Now, full disclosure, I practice reintegrative therapy, and I do consultation every week with Joseph Nicolosi Jr. But I'm not just going to be singing the praises of this film. I'm going to expound on some topics, but I'll also offer some criticism as I go along. So, who's ready? Let's jump in.
Since the sexual revolution, attitudes toward homosexuality have changed dramatically.
All people want is to be loved, and if people are going to hate on love, that's really ridiculous.
Gay and lesbian clubs, pride parades, and gay marriage. For gay and lesbians, the battle seems to be won. Gay is okay. Those who oppose gay and lesbian values can expect labels of bigotry and hate. Widespread approval of sexual freedom extends to everyone, except perhaps one segment of the population. Those who seek to leave homosexuality and pursue heterosexuality instead. These men and women have homosexual feelings, but don't accept a gay identity. They believe homosexuality is not who they really are, and instead seek a way out. But those seeking a way out can expect a hostile reaction. Their choice to leave a gay identity is often seen as a betrayal of the LGBT community, leaving them as outsiders. Some of them seek therapy to help them make this change, but their options are limited, and sometimes in the face of heavy resistance. Plenty of gay leaders say that this kind of therapy is dangerous, homophobic, and that no one can actually change their sexuality.
As long as you've got this calcified religious extremist core in this country, you're not going to see this change.
If somebody said to me, "Oh, this is just your religion," I would say, well, so what if it is? How is that your business to determine the validity of my religion? How dare you? Is that not my right?
Some even say it should be banned. But others defend it, saying they changed and that everyone should have the freedom to choose their own path and whom they choose to love, even if that means leaving the gay community.
A man with same-sex attraction who wants to do anything besides dive full into his same-sex attraction is really ostracized by the straight community. Probably doesn't understand him. The gay community is threatened by him and his personal stance. There's not really a community that does accept him. These men don't want to speak up.
This topic is a hotbed issue for politicians.
But now they want to tell us that we can't make choices on what we want to read. This is wrong. They're infringing upon our First Amendment rights.
So who are these people at the very center of this controversy? Those who seek to leave the gay community. How did they develop these feelings they don't want? Why do they reject a gay identity? And is their change even genuine? This short story follows the lives of 4 men who found therapy and now say they've discovered a heterosexual nature deep within them.
I want to jump in here real quick to make some distinctions and hopefully clear up some confusion. When people have a conflict with their same-sex attraction, they have, and should have, a few options. First, there are ministry approaches. For the most part, their focus has been on spiritual discipleship, seen through encouraging the person to deepen the relationship with God, and on reinforcing commitment to values by repenting and gaining accountability and support for behavior and heart change. You have to understand that the soul has certain components. You have your mind, will, emotions, and your relationships. And so a lot of these ministries are excellent at addressing the whole person, their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and their relationships, especially when they're done in a group setting. But they tend to be less equipped to address the feelings, at least at the level of the arousal, and the thoughts at the level of fantasy. This has been my experience. So much has been focused on repentance that there's been a little more of an apprehension to go deeper and really a little bit of uncertainty about what to do with the persistent arousal experiences that come up. That's what I believe makes reintegrative therapy and other therapeutic approaches that fall under safety, sexual attraction fluidity exploration in therapy so special and so needed. Using mainstream, evidence-based psychological interventions, we help people address the attractions at a deeper level. But here's the paradox. Reintegrative therapy will quite clearly state that changing orientation is not the goal. One, because orientation is not a very useful and well-defined term. But semantics aside, the truth is that if you attempt changing the arousal in a direct manner, if you focus your efforts just on that, you hit far more challenges. So we instead take a curious, mindful approach to help clients, one, understand the attractions, and two, then explore change in an indirect manner by working on what we discover, usually trauma and deficits and unfulfilled legitimate needs. So you'll hear them say in this documentary that as we resolve underlying trauma, we may see the sexuality shift as a byproduct. Some clients will only get to the place of better understanding, and that's okay. Combined with the support they have with other approaches such as support groups and self-help and discipleship, they can live according to their values and may over time experience a gradual shift in their sexual feelings. Others will gain a lot of benefit from the techniques used in reintegrative therapy and gain more self-mastery in dealing with their attractions when they emerge. And others will experience such healing of the root issues that they experience a more profound change in their feelings on a regular basis.
I don't know perfectly the answer, but I know that at a young age, I felt overwhelmed at times by my mom and so far off from my dad. In fact, I had this image of like me being in a jungle and like crying as a kid out from my dad and just praying that my father would be like a jungle warrior, like coming and chopping through the bush and trying to find me, to hunt for my heart. And as I got older, I think I really started sexualizing that yearning, that longing for being pursued by a man that saw me, my whole body, mind, soul, being, and said, "You're enough. You're enough."
That is one of the most common themes in the fantasies of men with SSA, same-sex attraction, or same-sex sexual attraction, that I've encountered. The desire to be pursued by a man who's viewed as masculine and more experienced. There's also a hint here in what Michael just shared of what we call the classic triadic family relationship. More on that later.
Probably the biggest catalyst for change for me was when I was on I'll call it a splurge, and I hooked up with, I don't remember how many, probably at least 10, maybe 15 guys in a week period. And at the end of that, looking at myself in the mirror and just thinking, who have I become? What have I become? This isn't who I want to be. That's when I said, enough is enough. I don't have the answers. I don't know exactly where to go, but this can't stand anymore.
Nathan's story is common among our clients. They lived a gay life, oftentimes promiscuous, and found it unsatisfying or devoid of truth and real love. Now, critics, especially gay Christian critics, are going to hear that and say, well, the problem is just the promiscuity. Why don't they just learn to be better self-controlled and get into a committed relationship? Or maybe just enter into a spiritual friendship. Part of me wants to say that the constant pursuit of novelty, and thus promiscuity, is a feature, not a bug, of male homosexuality. But I also must acknowledge that that's not everyone's story. And there are plenty of guys I've worked with who have had the attractions and never acted out on them. At least not with another person. The crossroads they face is this: go the route of gay Christianity, whether celibate or fully affirming, or engage in the arduous journey of better understanding, mastering, and healing their feelings and proclivities. I believe that true Christian growth is demonstrated in magnanimity, the virtue of being great of mind and heart, to elevate oneself to the full worth and dignity of the soul. And for sexuality strugglers, that means pursuit of integration of the lost parts of self and being opened to being sexually whole.
Back when I was 17, I came across, by accident, this book that was called Loving Someone Gay. And I thought, wow, I need to read this. I need to understand if I'm gay. I hope to get the answers here. Sadly, there was no other view available next to that book or in the same bookshelf. So the whole book is about accepting that because you have some attractions to the same sex, you are gay.
Dennis's story is particularly poignant. He represents the outcome of censorship and outlawing viewpoints and therapeutic options for people, and exposing kids and adolescents to only one side, the gay affirmative side.
I've recognized and learned that in my own life there were two really searing events that kind of created detachment for me. So the first was my being born with a cleft and being separated from my caregivers, my mother. I knew on a cognitive level that I was wanted, that I was loved, and yet there was this thing on my face, and it made me feel like I wasn't.
What John's bringing up is one of the most common and powerful factors that drives SSA fantasies: bodily shame. In his case, it was from a deformity, but for most guys, it's just from being small in stature, or physically uncoordinated, or unathletic, or being a late bloomer when it comes to puberty. Experiencing abuse or molestation could also be a route to bodily shame. And other guys I work with tend toward obsessive-compulsive disorder and get fixated on the minutiae of their bodies, exaggerating the slightest imperfections. And so they have this pervasive sense of shame about not being masculine enough in their body, and thus they envy other guys, whether same-sex peers or older men, that seem to them to embody the masculine traits that they desire for themselves, but don't have. Or at least they don't believe they have.
The second is from the age of 8 to 14, we lived outside of the U.S., and we lived in an African country. And when I moved back at the age of 14, it was chaos, let me tell you. It was during that time, like 15, 16, that when I just felt so inadequate for being who I was. The message was, I'm not presentable to the world, I'm less than. Through both of those experiences, it was like the trench was dug deeper to be split off from myself.
And then he has the task, in the middle of adolescence, of trying to fit in the world of his same-sex peers. But he lacks the confidence in his identity and looks, and he was coming from a completely different culture now. That's a huge burden for a young man in his situation.
You have the right to change your sexuality and your gender identification throughout the course of a lifetime, and someone may change back and forth. It is not just one identity.
I'm gay, but once in a while I'm like, oh, this girl is actually hot.
I think that there's no okay, this person is 100% gay, that means they can't think a girl is pretty, and then vice versa.
I believe that even a gay person should be able to explore heterosexuality if that's what they would like to do.
I love that they included the opinions from people at the Gay Pride Festival. The impression we get from the media and from activists is that the presence of a therapeutic alternative for people with unwanted same-sex attraction is a threat to the LGBT community. But a truly liberal society is open to people choosing their own way of psychologically resolving conflicts with their sexual feelings. As a conservative, though, I don't like that being the sole basis of my argument for the rights of ex-LGBT people or people with unwanted same-sex attraction. The truth is that what is best for individuals and society is for people to do as much as they can to live in accordance with the teleology, the purpose, the ends, and design of their bodies. And you know what? I shouldn't be pressured to hide as a citizen or even as a therapist that that's my position.
I decided to explore reintegrative therapy because I realized I wasn't at peace with myself. There were parts of myself that I didn't like. There were parts of myself that I rejected. And I realized that I feared other men. I felt less than them. I didn't know how to act around other men. I realized that I had stories in my head that I told myself about women.
I wasn't liking who I was becoming. I wasn't liking my behavior. It wasn't in line with my values. I didn't feel like I was being my authentic self. And so I wanted to address it head on.
Notice here that these guys did not pursue counseling because they were forced to, coerced to, or because of shaming from their families or religious communities. This is consistent with what Carolyn Pila found in her study of 75 men that did reintegrative therapy, the Pila and Sutton study that was published in 2021.
When we talk about this subject, identity comes up a lot. Are these people really gay people and we're trying to make them straight? Maybe they were really straight all along and we're just helping them to be who they were. What we're really talking about is the topic of identity. And really, what defines all of us isn't so much who we want to have sex with. It's not our sexual desires. It's our values. And ancient faith traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, ancient philosophers like Socrates all agreed it's not our desires that define us, it's our values that define us. My clients believe that their values define them, and I agree with them.
Identity really is the crux of the matter. And if we're defining identity as one self-concept, then I agree with what Joseph Nicolosi Jr. is saying here. When I talk about identity, though, I prefer to go a bit more radical and question the assumption that identity is something subjective, like an internal experience or viewpoint of oneself. Rather, if we go to the root word of identity, Latin word idem, which means sameness, identity is objective, not subjective. It means to have the same traits as others in a particular group. Therefore, there are essential traits necessary for sexual identity. And the direction of one's arousal templates, the direction of one's sexual fantasies, is not a reliable basis for identity. The one stable reality for one's sexual identity is the design of the body, in particular in the genitalia.
I sought therapy when I realized that this gay affirming activities and dressing the gay man suit, putting on the gay man hat was really hard, and it didn't feel right.
Some people like their homosexuality and want to keep it, want to work on other things. That's great. We work with them. We have nothing against them. I want to come alongside them just like I want to come alongside any group that feels maligned or attacked by society. So they're welcome here, absolutely.
I don't think somebody can go from gay to straight because I think that if you're, I think it's more of a thing that's kind of determined at birth.
I think it's just, you know, as Lady Gaga says, you were born this way.
It starts from the very beginning since I start recalling my memories. It wasn't really a choice. It was more of what I grew up into and what became my preference as I was becoming who I am right now.
This is the false dichotomy so many people make. You're either born that way or it's a choice. But you can grow up with a pervasive emotional experience and it be neither a choice nor inborn. It's like we check our brains and curiosity at the door when it comes to this issue.
So many people who have same-sex attraction, they say, but I've always felt this way. Of course you've always felt this way. So we know this is coming from a very, very young age. It's a disconnect from the masculinity. So it's oftentimes these boys, they feel weaker, they feel unable to connect to males, they feel unable to connect to their father. That's probably the biggest one right there.
The biggest factor for me was not having that, not receiving enough affection and attention and care as a kid growing up by my dad, and then also not receiving it as much as I needed it from peers as well.
As far as for everyone, it's really difficult to determine how every single person develops same-sex attraction. Because people are always like, oh no, I had this cousin, he has the best dad ever, and I've heard all these stories, and there's always these one-offs. But for the vast majority of men who develop same-sex attraction, it does come in a very standardized process.
Yes, about 3/4 of the men we work with fit this typical developmental pattern, which Joseph Nicolosi Sr. outlined quite thoroughly in his books. Now, what about all the ones that don't fit that? Well, it's not like Nicolosi's developmental model didn't account for them. Read Shame and Attachment Loss. He notes several types of contributors to male same-sex attraction. Some just have one type, others have combinations. So let's take a look at the different stages of homosexual development that Nicolosi Sr. outlined in his book, Shame and Attachment Loss. Phase 1 goes all the way back to attachment in the first year of life, the attachment that a boy needs for basic sense of trust in others and sense of being worth others' love and affection and attention. And that's in the attachment that a child has with the mother. So a lot of the focus that you'll hear from people who talk about the developmental model will be on the relationship with the father. But we know from attachment theory that identity first starts with bonding with the mother in general, because the child spends 9 months in the womb. She's the one who's going to be typically taking care of the child. She's going to be the one who's most attentive to a child's needs. So generally, attachment wounds start there, at least when it comes to insecure attachment. So that's potential contributor number 1, going back as young as the first year of life, having an insecure attachment that could lead to a separation anxiety. Phase 2 is the gender identity stage, where now the boy's main attachment figure must switch from mother to father. And this occurs from about age 1.5 to 3, maybe up to 5, where he must form this very strong bond with dad and know that he's not his mom. Mom is safe. Mom becomes a secure attachment base, but dad helps draw him away from mom and toward identification with dad and then the world of men. And that's dad's responsibility. The boy doesn't know that he has to take that risk and that chance of differentiating himself from mom. The dad's responsibility is to draw him out. If that doesn't happen, then there can be a case of insecurity about your gender identity. It might not be at the full extent as someone with gender identity disorder or later gender dysphoria, but at least it could be felt as a sense of being different, as being insecure in one's masculinity. Nicolosi says that the third stage is from the more play and school age, from 5 to 11. And this is what he calls the erotic development, where the main task is to bond with same-sex peers or same-sex siblings. And if there's a sense of gender inferiority or insecurity, the bonding will be more of a longing, a deep longing to gain what the other boys have and to acquire their masculinity. That prepares the child for eroticization when puberty comes. And then the fourth contributor or fourth stage is from the teenage years on, where now there's the social and cultural forces that introduce and then reinforce a gay identity and welcome the child or the adolescent into the gay world. And now with all this propaganda, we're seeing this influence starting at younger and younger ages. And so when I do speaking engagements or to go to conferences, I tell people, hey, there's these typical developmental factors that we tend to see, but you almost now have to take that with a grain of salt, because now the propaganda is so intense and is so pervasive, it's ubiquitous now, that you don't even need a lot of these typical or classic developmental influences that we used to see in most guys that sort of started and launched the ex-gay ministry movement in the 70s and 80s. Because now we have such propaganda that children who are vulnerable and influential at young ages are being told that they're gay just for having an interest in same-sex peers that might not even be sexual, but just admiring same-sex peers or a longing to connect with them. It's being sexualized and then being solidified into a gay or some other LGBT identity at younger and younger ages.
There was a series of seemingly unrelated events that little by little cornered me into this place where I was not affirmed as a boy. I was not affirmed by the men in my family. I was not affirmed by my father. I was not affirmed as a masculine being by my grandfather, by my uncle. I wasn't affirmed as a male by my mother, by my grandmother. And this was not intentional of them.
What's not being talked about is that many of these men describe remarkably similar experiences in their childhoods. They keep describing experiences with a father who's felt distant to them, critical. The clients will often describe their mothers as intrusive, sometimes overbearing. And these clients oftentimes have a temperamental sensitivity. Now, if you put these factors together, it's going to increase the probability that the boy is going to have difficulty in terms of gender development, in disidentifying with the mother and identifying with the father.
This is what we call the classic triadic relationship. And this is where a lot of critics, especially evangelical ones, will claim, aha, this is all Freudian. Because the reality is this is a pattern that Sigmund Freud observed in men with a homosexual fixation. But instead of just labeling it as Freudian and then dismissing it because we collectively hate Freud, the rational thing to do is ask, is it true? In his book, The Meaning of Sex, A New Christian Ethos, Christopher Doyle presents the research on this theory of the distant or rejecting father and overbearing mother. Now keep in mind that the theory also states that what is necessary is for the boy to have a very sensitive temperament, in which he'll internalize this dynamic from the parents. Okay, that's often overlooked in the criticism of this model. But anyway, let's look at the research though on how the parents were. In their 1996 book, Freud Scientifically Reappraised, Testing the Theories in Therapy, Seymour Fisher and Roger Greenberg reviewed all the psychoanalytic scientific research and found that the classic father complex described above, a distant, detached, cold, or hostile father, as seen by the homosexual son, to be overwhelmingly supported by several empirical studies. In fact, Fisher and Greenberg state in their review of the literature, there is not a single study that we have been able to locate in which male homosexuals refer to their father as positively or affectionate. However, when examining the increased data available after their original publication, they concluded, quote, the increased pool of data available reinforces the concept of the negative father. The concept of the negative father is strengthened not only by additional studies based on questionnaire responses and subliminal inputs, but also cross-cultural quantitative indexes. The post-1977 material we have reviewed concerning male homosexuality has narrowed the apparent support for Freud's formulation in this area. Previously, we regarded the empirical data to be congruent with Freud's theory that male homosexuality derives from too much closeness to mother and a distant negative relationship with father. As noted, the increased pool of data available reinforces the concept of the negative father but fails to support the idea of the overly close, seductive mother. So we are left with only one of the major elements in Freud's original formula concerning the parental vectors that are involved in moving a male child toward homosexuality. This reduction in confirmed points on the graph makes it all too easy to conjure up alternative theories of homosexuality that could incorporate the negative father data. There would be no need to appeal to the Oedipal image of a son competing with his father for mother's love." Unquote. Doyle continues, quote, "In that sense, we can see that the classic Freudian view of male homosexuality has some validity. However, it seems less certain that a poor attachment with the father in combination with an overbearing, dominant, or overly close mother is the primary cause for the development of homosexuality in all cases. And although this combination may be the cause for some men, John Bowlby, who's one of the main attachment researchers and theorists, points out in his seminal work, Attachment and Loss, that, quote, "traditional psychoanalytic theory fails to explain both the intense attachment of infants to a mother figure and young children's dramatic responses to separation. Unlike psychoanalysts, excessive separation anxiety is usually facilitated by adverse family experiences and communications that make the child feel insecure in his basic attachments." Unquote. Doyle continues, "Re-examining what we understand, psychodynamic thinking is a development of psychoanalytic theory. While the psychoanalytic approach gave us a one-dimensional notion of the overpossessive, intrusive, domineering mother to explain the etiology for male homosexuality, psychodynamic thinking recognizes that possibility, but has also described this interaction between mother and son as an intense but insecure attachment. Unlike the original attachment scenario based on psychoanalytic theory, psychodynamic thinking has the mother going back and forth between intrusive and detached, which may have implications for the development of homosexuality in that it frustrates a child's sense of security with the mother, promoting what is described above as separation anxiety. Regardless of the mother's role in this development, it is clear that the attachment with the father is an integral part of the development of same-sex attraction. In their book, Growing Up Straight, Peter and Barbara Wyden identify the father's influence as a key factor in the development of homosexuality in both males and females. Quote, "Experts do agree that the role of fathers is one of the principal problems, possibly even the number one problem, in homosexuality, that mothers have perhaps been blamed too much over the years, that the significance of fathers in the making of male as well as female homosexuality has been inadequately recognized, and that parents should develop a better understanding of why this is a crucial factor," unquote, as well as unquote from Doyle. So, although there may not be empirical data to support the overbearing mother idea, what I hear in the majority of my clients is how mom was always there, but there was a disconnect with dad. And so the boy might not have experienced his mom as overbearing, but rather that she was the only one that was there. And I believe that from the boy's vantage point, there's nothing about mom that is over-involved. Better that than neither parent showing a consistent and persistent interest in the boy. The boy would risk annihilation if mom wasn't there as much as she was. What the boy doesn't see, though, is how dad's proper involvement and connection would have rightly balanced out mom's type of nurture in a way that would affirm the boy's masculinity and instill a sense of difference from the feminine that would later get eroticized in puberty. But that doesn't happen if there isn't the disidentification with mom. So she might not have been overbearing, but there certainly was too much of a presence of mom and not enough of the identification with dad to help the boy disidentify with the feminine.
I wanted to be loved. I wanted affection. I wanted to be cared about. And I wanted it from my father, but then as a substitute, I wanted it from another guy. And when I wasn't getting it from a peer, then I ended up turning that into a sexualized nature.
The perfect storm for creating same-sex attraction in someone, or male same-sex attraction at least. A father who's there and yet simultaneously not there. So he's uninvolved. He's always somewhere, but he's just unable for the boy to connect with. So he's not that he's out of the home. It's not that there's no father figure. It's that he's there and simultaneously unreachable for whatever reason. And then maybe the mother, sees that in the home, that the father's not taking up that slack, and she is like super mom. She's always involved, hands-on, and so the child has tons of female involvement and a very, very limited male involvement. That masculine world always becomes impossible to reach.
It's hard because I think my mom had hoped that as kids we would be able to reflect to her what she had always hoped her family would be, which is maybe perfect. She struggled a lot with overreacting to us as kids and drawing us maybe too close, and my father pulled away a lot, and he was not able to be present with me emotionally.
Ultimately, the individual's masculinity hasn't been fully affirmed. And why is it not fully affirmed? Could have a bad relationship to their father, or a distant relationship with their father. Their brothers could have been bullied in school, could have had sexual abuse, but they question their maleness, right? Their masculinity, they don't fully believe in it.
And that really is the crux of the issue for most men with same-sex attraction, that is rooted in an early age. For whatever reason, there's gender insecurity. For boys whose SSA started later in life, there are likely other explanations, such as conditioning through sexual molestation or peer experimentation or porn use, and then constant reinforcement of gay identification or exploration through propaganda.
What I see now is that I had attractions that were a result of a lot of my upbringing, and those manifested sexually. And once I dealt with, reintegrated, if you will, some of those issues, those attractions, first they dissipated, and now they're virtually gone.
Because of my shame about my attractions to other men, I really made a very severe cut between me and other guys. So in that way, I did not fulfill this need for masculine connection, to be a man among men.
Just another note here. Shame is really the key issue. Guys can experience a whole range of potentially powerful contributing factors, but what makes the difference is whether or not shame is internalized. Because shame is all about disconnection. Both internally, I feel bad about something, but I cannot address it, I can't talk about it, so I'll just shut down and disconnect from my true feelings and desires. And socially, there's something about me that is wrong and makes me unacceptable. The irony is our critics baselessly accuse us of shaming our clients. But the truth is our focus is on eliminating the shame they experience. That's where true freedom lies. When a man can connect with those previously sanctioned parts of his internal experience and his true, legitimate longings for healthy, same-sex affirmation, affection, and association. And when a man can share vulnerably with another man and be understood and accepted, that removes shame and brings healing.
When I was going through puberty, I had a lot of conflicting thoughts about, you would see a good-looking, handsome teacher who's a guy, and my brain would be like, he's handsome, and I'd be like, wait, what does this mean for me?
It's natural, I think. It wasn't something. If I were to choose this, why would someone choose this? Because people don't. They're really mean to gay people, basically. So it's natural.
When I first began this process of taking the glasses off and looking at my judgments and my beliefs about men and my beliefs about myself, is that those were two very separate things. It's like, men were this way, but as a man, I'm this way. So men are strong. Men are good looking. Men are stoic. They don't have emotions, right? Men have it all together. Men are mechanical. Over here, as a man, I felt weak. I didn't feel good looking. I didn't feel like I had what it takes. And so you can see is if I have those false beliefs, taking off the glasses again and recognizing they're false beliefs. Are men strong? Yeah, some of them are, but not all. Are all men mechanical? No. Are all men stoic? No. And so as a man, am I strong? Yeah. So learning to accept myself and my masculine attributes and learning to remove the negative feelings I feel toward other men. They started to come together.
I love the exercise that shows John doing. It highlights how part of our work is challenging the gender stereotypes that our men have internalized and used to judge and shame themselves.
The changes in sexual orientation, they're a result of a much deeper process of understanding myself, of getting myself unstuck from where my childhood left me.
This whole thing of trying to say, this happened to me and that person did that to me and that's why I'm like this is, it's fruitless, for one. And the other is that there's so many nuances to this whole story, in my life anyway, that I couldn't just say one thing caused these issues.
The more that the individual when they're young is being taken apart by their environment, right? The more shame they experience, the more criticism they get, the more protection of, no, you can't play with those other boys in the mud, you might get hurt, you're over here. The more message that they have that, wow, I'm different, I'm not good enough, I'm not, strong enough, then they start believing it, right? And they feel it, and then all of a sudden, once they hit puberty, now the sexual attractions start.
I remember being in the hot tub with some friends in probably 8th grade, and another friend who was kind of late going through puberty saying, I can't wait to grow hair into my arms. And they were so excited at becoming an adult man. And I was so afraid of that. And I think that is my experience of yearning for masculinity, but afraid to see it in myself. Because afraid my own masculinity wasn't enough.
My sisters had a doll, a very nice doll with blonde, long hair. And one day, I took a pair of scissors and gave the doll a haircut, like a boy style. And as I walk into the family room, holding this doll, there's a total commotion in the room. My sisters crying, my grandmother shouting at me, my parents afraid because I was holding a doll and a pair of scissors on the other hand. The message here was, you've been a very bad boy, and you should not make dolls into boys. Just keep them as they are and don't change things. This is pivotal in my development. The reason I did that was I had what every little boy has. I had masculine strivings. This is something that it's part of development. It's just that I got punished for them.
What this set of stories illustrates is how at critical stages of development, the boys received messages that attacked masculinity, and they internalized these messages. I recall a story of one guy I know who became a leader of an ex-gay ministry, and he shared that when he was a young boy, he had ADHD. He was very hyper and rambunctious, and his mother did not tolerate it, and she kept shaming him for being actually quite masculine. And his father did not intervene to create the space the boy needed to explore his masculinity without judgment. He was a hyperactive kid. He liked to run, he liked to jump, he liked to play with cars and play on the furniture. And the mom just told him so many times that was wrong. Don't do that, that's wrong. Boys don't do that. And because she just could not tolerate that that's how boys are. I grew up me and my brothers, we roughhoused. And if we're up to my mom, we would never have roughhoused. But my dad would be like, go away, and he'd wrestle with us. Dad has to sort of intervene and create that space for boys to be affirmed in their natural tendencies. Now, not every boy has those. Some are what we call gender atypical or gender non-conforming. And so they might be anomalous and might not be as into the rough and tumble play. That's okay. They should be affirmed in that as well and learn that there are other forms of masculinity that isn't quite so full of rough and tumble. But in this guy I'm talking about, for him, he learned that as a boy, what he needed to do was shut down his assertive and playful nature in order to be accepted. So then when puberty comes, he longs to connect with other boys who embody that lost part of his masculine self. But instead, that connection gets eroticized.
The boy, as he goes into this particular phase of development, is going to have difficulty because the environment is not facilitating the boy's gender strivings, his masculine strivings. And the boy will try to reach out to and emulate other males around him, but if the environment is not conducive to that, in fact, if anything, if the environment makes it more difficult for him, this boy experiences a hurt and he retreats back to the mother and doesn't make that gender identity shift. That's what we see for many of our clients. Girls are their best friends. They know women like the back of their hands. But men are mysterious, men are exciting, men are exotic, men feel unfamiliar to my clients.
Therapy might be a healthy process if the person who is self-identifying as needing that therapy is there with their own consent, is there with a willingness to achieve something that is just prescribed by themselves.
You know, if a gay man is tired of the lifestyle, whatever that means to them, then you know, if they feel the inclination to, you know, explore relations with somebody that they normally wouldn't, then that's their prerogative. You know, who am I to judge? Who am I to say, oh no, you're gay, you need to only be with men? We have to differentiate between two different types of therapy. There's conversion therapy. Now, conversion therapy is a very broad term. It's a very broad term. It's ill-defined. There's no ethics code. There's no governing body. Conversion therapy is something that's practiced by and large by unlicensed individuals. In reintegrative therapy, the client is in the driver's seat. The licensed psychotherapist says we can use evidence-based treatments to approach your childhood traumas or any sexual addictions you may have. And as that's resolved, the sexuality begins to change on its own.
This harkens back to what I said earlier. Now I'm just going to talk about the elephant in the room. If conversion therapy is too broad and ill-defined as a term, then what are we referring to when we say it's practiced largely by unlicensed clinicians? If it's not defined, then what are we referring to? Sadly, I think the subtle insinuation is that he's referring to ex-gay ministries. As far as LGBT activists are concerned, though, conversion therapy refers to any practice that aims to help people change feelings or behaviors away from homosexuality or transgender identification. In the USA, so far, because of our religious liberty protections, the bans have only been against licensed clinicians, because we've made this divide between the public secular life and the private religious life. But the activist's intent is to ban it everywhere, for ministries, or make it so culturally unacceptable that a ministry or a church wouldn't dare do anything that could be viewed as conversion therapy. They'll do their best to distance themselves from anything that can be accused of being conversion therapy. In Western countries that don't have the same religious liberty protections that we have in the US, like Canada, France, and Victoria, Australia, we're seeing bans across the board, whether it's by licensed clinicians or ministers. So really, I just tire of playing the semantics game. I'm not a conversion therapist. These are conversion therapists. I don't use the term conversion therapy, but when someone uses the term, I usually know what they mean, and it's not good, and ultimately, it involves both the ministries and the therapeutic approaches. So we need to both be joining together and fighting against it.
Well, that's one of the misnomers right there, is people think reintegrative therapy is conversion therapy, where you're trying to make someone move somebody from gay to straight. Honestly, most of my therapy wasn't at all about the whole sexual attraction thing. I mean, it would come up and we would work on different things, but it was always, what is under there? What is under there? I never at any point felt like my therapist was trying to coerce me or change me to think a certain way.
So there's been a lot of this accusation that people have been forced to change, and I think there's some historical truth to that.
So if any one of you have let yourself become involved with an adult homosexual or with another boy, and you're doing this on a regular basis, you better stop quick. And if we catch you involved with a homosexual, your parents are going to know about it first. And you will be caught.
A lot has come down through other people's churches of all the different religions, or people's parents who have had very, very strict views, forcing their kids to change. That is not what this therapy is about whatsoever.
It's been about dealing with issues that I grew up with. It dealt with dealing with my dad, and dealing with my mom, and dealing with my peers, and dealing with molestation events.
I've had clients who have gone to gay affirmative therapists, and they've been told that they have to just continue that way of coming out more gay and accepting their homosexuality. We don't force the client to choose that path. We let them choose either option.
Preach. If anything, it's the affirmation-only approach that is coercive. Our work is enabling our clients to have the freedom to choose. Do I personally hope that they will choose that which is in line with God's design for them? You bet. But I don't make it a requirement of therapy that they share my values. Just that they be open to exploration and doing trauma therapy, and just let whatever happens happen.
It's about understanding the shame that the person might feel outside of therapy, and getting to the bottom of that shame.
Reintegrative therapy for me was finding the disparate parts of myself that had been lost and bringing them together and becoming whole.
The results of being in this therapy have helped me to feel comfortable with who I am as a man, helped me to feel connected to other people, and helped me to feel like a man among other men.
It's about reintegrating, which is what we call this, reintegrative therapy. It's the idea of connecting to parts of ourselves that were split off, that were pushed away. Many of my clients felt that their masculine strivings were pushed away and shamed, and those masculine strivings were cauterized in a sense.
I really actually liked the term reintegration, because it was these disparate parts of myself I wanted to go find and learn about and grieve and heal and pull together, and I always felt that from him. Our very first session, that was when I had a lot of shame and angst around my attractions. He said, I'm not going to promise that those will ever go away. And I was like, what? But that's why I'm here. You're supposed to fix me, He's like, no. He's like, but I can promise that they will no longer disturb you, and that you will be living your life fully in however way you choose to and you want to, and that those things will no longer disturb you. And by gumbo, he's right.
On a neurobiological basis, it's really hard, if not impossible, to get rid of data. But we can reconfigure data. We're not getting rid of something as if we're removing a part of that. A big misnomer is that we're trying to get rid of unwanted same-sex attractions. We don't get rid of anything. We help fulfill these men, and as they do so, the sexuality shifts on its own.
This is a key point. We don't get rid of same-sex attractions. We discover what are the true desires underneath that are being distorted or disordered. And then we heal the root of the distortion and equip our clients to fulfill properly their true longings and desires. What's important for people to understand is that there's a difference between your desires and your arousal template. This is a phrase I picked up from Douglas Carpenter's book, Secret Shame. What triggers sexual arousal in you can be rooted in trauma and physiological conditioning. It's not necessarily a reflection of what you really desire. And so now I pretty much avoid using the term homosexual desire or gay desire, but rather attractions or arousal and make it distinct from what the person really desires, which is usually same-sex connection, affirmation, affection, which aren't necessarily erotic.
It's not a guarantee. What you can be guaranteed of is dealing with wounds that you've had and becoming a wholer person.
Yes, I'm gay, and one day maybe I will be with a woman. Just because I'm attracted to a man or woman right now doesn't mean I'll be attracted just to one or the other in the future.
I think exploring your sexual fluidity would be like exploring your favorite ice cream flavors. You can be stuck to vanilla and chocolate your whole life.
Yeah, in the future, I could see myself having a sexual relationship with a person of the opposite sex, because I think nothing ever stays the same and everything is ever changing.
It's not the same necessarily as food or, what movies I want to watch or things like that, but those are constantly changing and they happen necessarily without me being conscious of them. I think one day you might wake up and say like, oh, I'm interested in this.
Okay, confession time. We've been using the term sexual attraction fluidity for some time, kind of co-opting it from lesbian psychologist Lisa Diamond. And I don't quite like the connotations of the word fluid. It gives the idea that the attractions are like water, and they're very unstable and arbitrarily shifting. There's research that may support this conceptualization among women and among adolescents of both sexes. However, I think it would be more accurate to refer to sexual attraction patterns as plastic. We have plasticity. The patterns of attraction are mostly stable, and certain conditions are required for them to change in the moment and long term. It's not just by accident they tend to change. But the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity already adopted the term safety, sexual attraction fluidity exploration in therapy, so fluidity is now entrenched in our field, and safety has a good ring to it.
In a broader context, we should be aware that 30 years of science has shown us that sexuality is fluid and can change for some people. It's not just scientists who are becoming aware of this. In 2016, the CDC released their statements on sexual identity. They polled people in the United States, and they found that more people, particularly young people, were identifying themselves as being sexually fluid, that their sexuality can change. This corresponds perfectly with neuroscience. We know that the specific regions of the brain that are most responsible for sexual preference are the same areas of the brain that change throughout the course of our life.
What psychologists like to use is the Kinsey scale. It goes from strictly homosexual to strictly heterosexual, and there's all sorts of places in the middle, and that people can and do move alongside that. And if people can and do move alongside that, is it okay for someone to move more towards the heterosexual side, and is it okay for someone to move more towards the homosexual side? Perhaps it should be the person's own choice about where they want to move.
I identify as like gender fluid, non-binary, kind of somewhere in there. And then I'm pan and poly, so I have two like people that I'm dating, and then I have a few other like people that I'm kind of talking to.
I mean, right there is kind of the epitome of what I'm talking about by taking this fluidity idea too far. The postmodernists don't just look at sexual attraction as fluid, but sexuality and gender as fluid, because their MO is to be critical of anything that's been culturally accepted as a norm, and then to deconstruct it.
I mean, I'm definitely identify as gay, but I mean, a nice lady walks by and I'm like, hey.
I wouldn't say that I have zero attraction to women. There were certain women I had some levels of attraction to, but it was minimal, and I always felt that I wasn't masculine enough to interact with them as a man. It was more like well, let's kind of have this brother-sister relationship going on, this platonic thing.
This is another thing we observe often. A lot of men who identified as exclusively homosexual can still recall a time when they found a female, or women in general, to be attractive. It might have been minimal, or it might have been suppressed, especially as they further indulged the homosexual inclinations that they experienced.
When I am experiencing same-sex attraction, I feel like everything turns in on myself. It's all about me. It's like a star caving in on itself. That's how I feel. It feels palpable in my body. I feel intrinsically disconnected from the world around me. When I step out of that into assertion and into my full masculine self, I don't feel sorry for being me.
I remember going to this retreat, and all the way to the retreat, I'm driving there thinking, I don't know if I want to do this. I got there late. All the guys are in the cafeteria, right? So I park and I walk up to the cafeteria and I'm outside the door, and there's just this roar, collective roar of masculine voices. I felt so fearful that I willed myself and finally to go in, but I just stood there for a long time. I was like, I don't belong here. I want to get back in my car. I want to drive home. Fast forward quite a few years. I actually chose to go to that same retreat because it's an annual retreat they do for men. I drove up. It was deja vu. I walked up to the cafeteria. I was a little bit late then too. Heard this roar of masculine voices. And there was such a difference in my body. I loved hearing that. And I was like, let me in there. That's my tribe. I belong. And that's huge for me, just to say I belong. That was a big piece of work for me, is this recognizing that I'm a man among men and I belong in the world of men and I'm safe here.
This is one of the key parts of recovery. Like I've said in recent conferences, it's the LGBT activists that want men with SSA to believe they're a different category of men, that they're fundamentally different. But what our clients come to discover is that they're not fundamentally different. And that's why I say the term conversion therapy is so inaccurate. Because I'm not changing anyone at a fundamental level. I'm not converting him from one type of man to another type of man. I'm helping them discover the truth of who they already are.
You know, I mean, I mentioned that I've had an experience that might be categorized as abuse by someone else, but like I said, it left no scar on me, and I don't categorize it as abuse. I just was a younger person who had consensual sex with an older person, and I don't think it had a major impact. I think it was a healthy, mutually agreed upon experience between consenting people, even though I wasn't really able to consent as a young person.
I was actually like sexually molested, not like anything serious, but
not anything serious.
As a kid, that sexual experience with a man early on could have definitely opened the door to me becoming gay in the future.
Here, they're just saying the quiet part out loud. For the sake of time, I'm not going to comment as much as I can here, but I will just note the difference in how the gay activists downplay the impact of sexual molestation. In reintegrative therapy, we treat it seriously, as we should. Think about that some.
I'm a veterinary student, so I work with animals, and I think you see a lot of animals that are neglected by their owners, and you see the effect it has on their behavior and how they interact with people. And as much as we like it or not, human beings are animals too, and we respond in similar fashions. And if we're neglected, I feel like friends you see, you know, they're seeking that confirmation or love or whatnot. So it does have an effect on their behavior in the future, and I feel like they're maybe compared to someone who was raised in a nurturing, loving environment, they're more so seeking it and doing things that maybe someone else wouldn't to try and get that attention or love however they can, for better or worse.
The number one type of trauma we see is neglect, and that's so difficult to put a quantifier on neglect. It's by definition, a prolonged non-event is neglect. That is certainly a trauma. Trauma is not just when something happens that day. Trauma can be a takeaway of something that's needed, something that's life-giving.
My motivation was I want to be as healthy as I possibly can as a human being, period. Whether these attractions stay or go, I know I have wounds that need to be dealt with.
Part of this whole process was just learning to be okay with myself, shave my mustache off, look at myself in the mirror, say to the world, this is what you get. And I used to not want to make eye contact with myself in the mirror because I didn't like really looking at myself. I like what I see.
And as we use standard evidence-based treatments, the same treatments other clinics use, on those specific traumas, these clients notice an increase in their confidence, they feel more connected, more relaxed around other males, and as a byproduct, they notice the same-sex attraction is diminishing on their own.
If a client who's feeling this way, that their same-sex attraction really isn't them, goes to a gay affirmative therapist, what they're gonna get is this therapist informing them that they can't hold that view, that they need to just come out as gay, accept their homosexuality, and that's the only thing that's gonna make them feel better. There's a large group of men that simply does not work for, and they don't feel like that is true for themselves.
Lawmakers behind a new bill say it's potentially harmful to a patient's mental health. Conservatives say lawmakers are misrepresenting what conversion therapy offers.
Conversion therapy and changing someone's sexual orientation or gender identity is not actually a goal that can be achieved, and this prevents people from falling into the false impression that that can actually happen.
Everyone should be free to find therapy and support to help them achieve their desired goals and outcomes, not the government's goals and outcomes. The client should be in the driver's seat.
Where have we come now to where you can't even disagree with somebody who holds the LGBT community and its standards as gold and dismisses my perspective to the point where I should not be allowed to have my perspective? That is, now we've tipped the scale and gone to a completely destructive place.
My response to folks that are extremely antagonistic to reintegrative therapy is it's actually sadness. They think that their only option now is to affirm what attractions they have. And how sad is that? Now they're not given a choice. There is no option. It's this way, you are this way or you aren't. And that's a really sad message when I know for sure that there are alternatives.
You're essentially putting people in these perfect little boxes, and people don't fit perfectly into boxes. That's not reality. And so it would make sense that if you start with a premise that people fit exactly in one box or another, it's going to be hard for you to have an openness to people who have different points of view.
If the goal is to completely ban anyone from having access to somebody who professionally could help me work in to find my goals, my life path, you're going to tell me that that's freedom to ban me from that right?
In healthy communities, people are free to come and go as they choose. But it's unhealthy when individuals welcome a person into a community, but then try to block them when they try to leave. That's bullying, and that's wrong. And my clients have the freedom and the right to walk away from any kind of sexual practice that doesn't work for them.
If people want to live in a lifestyle, then they can continue to do that. But to take that option away from other people and to push a narrative that, to me, is not true, is extremely harmful.
At this point in my life where I am doing reintegrative therapy, sometimes I feel that, oh, here I am again fighting against the currents, because now gay is good, gay is encouraged, gay is everywhere. yeah, if you're gay, you're a superstar. At least that's what the media portrays.
There's hope, you're loved, there are reasons you feel this way, and you have support.
It's a journey. It's not necessarily a destination. It's about me becoming a more whole person, about me just dealing with myself and being more fulfilled.
The results of being in this therapy have helped me to feel comfortable with who I am as a man, helped me to feel connected to other people.
So unfortunate that it took me so long to get to this reintegrative therapy. It's just exactly what I would have loved to have had in my late teens. It would be the answer to all my questions. But better late than never.
And here Dennis offers a case for why therapy should be available to both adults and adolescents. It's a myth that adolescents are coming to therapy only because they're coerced by their parents, or by the therapist, or the church, or whatever. Some actually want help, and it should be available to them. And really, there's not much else to add. That last section speaks for itself. Please, share the documentary with others. A lot of effort was invested into it. It'd be a shame for it to not reach more people because of censorship. If you're a therapist, I hope you begin to critically question the narrative that's being pushed in our field. That conversion therapy, or reparative therapy, or any sort of effort to explore change in homosexual feelings is harmful and ineffective. Don't just take the APA's and ACA's condemnation as authoritative. Do the research. See how professional therapy that falls under safety and reintegrative therapy are both helpful, beneficial, and effective. And they don't make too broad of claims. They don't make promises. They have measured goals and outcome ideas. If you're a legislator or lobbyist, please advocate for policies based on the facts and that respect client rights. Protect client freedom to get the help they need in order to be aligned with their bodily design and their values. And if you're a struggler, please be encouraged. I hope that there will be more of us in this field soon to provide the assistance that you're seeking. And until next time, please know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully. And may you be free to love Him the same.